young white boy came into prison and he was given a chocolate by one of the gangs. And as a 12-year-old boy, he ate the chocolate. And that evening, they started to rape him. They raped their child for many hours. He cried, he screamed, he begged. No one helped him. I was there. I didn't help him. The next day, he was laying in a corridor naked in his own blood, shivering. And everybody jumped over him because he's a white boy. And just as I was about to jump over him, I looked at him. And something got hold of me. And I said, for those that don't know, I spent my whole youth in jail. I grew up in prison. And I wasn't a political prisoner. Many people say, you were at Robben Island. I don't say yes or no. If God put in their heart that I come from Robben Island, who am I to argue? But I was a common criminal. I grew up, became a gangster at the age of 12, 13 years old. At the age of 15, I was involved in my first bank robbery. At the age of 18, I was one of the most wanted criminals in this country. At the age of 20, I was sentenced to 17 years in prison. I wasn't sentenced to any prison. I was sentenced to the Grootfontein maximum security prison for hardened criminals. I went to jail. I joined one of the most feared gangs in jail. In 3 years, I led the 26 gang. And just for the ambassadors that's here, in South African prisons, you get 5 gangs everywhere, very organized. Gang number 1 is the 26 gang. They're the capitalists of the system. They're there for money-related issues. Gang number 2, you get the 27 gang. They violent, they stab, kill. Gang number 3 is the 28 gang. Got involved in sexual activity in jail and violence. Gang number 4 is the Big 5 gang. They're the guys that work with the cops, that inform. Gang number 5 is the Royal Air Force. They're the guys that escape. I don't know much about them because they're never there. But I became a member of the 26 gang. And I went from being an honorary member to leading the 26 gang. And I was extremely racist. I hated white people with a passion. I hated white people extremely. And I was released from jail. But just before I went to jail, Nelson Mandela broke my heart. Nelson Mandela stabbed many of us then in the back. Nelson Mandela betrayed many of us then. When we heard Nelson Mandela was coming out, I remember for the first time I woke up at 5 a.m. in the morning. My mother said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Mom, don't worry where I'm going. I'm coming back with good news." She said, "No, I want you to paint the roof of the house." I said, "Don't worry about painting this nonsensical house. Where I'm going, Mandela's coming out. I'm going to choose the house of a white man in town." And I went to town, went to look at the most nicest house, former President Balekambet. Because I knew Mandela's coming out, we're going to take the white people's houses. Because there's so many black people, I had to choose 2 or 3 houses, just in case somebody had my dream house in mind. And we were ready when Nelson Mandela came in. And Nelson Mandela stepped us in the back and he spoke about reconciliation. Now, many of us didn't understand what is reconciliation. And we asked the educated people, is it time for us to go and repossess? And they said no. Mandela said we must work with white people. We were very disappointed. Went to jail. Nelson Mandela was outside and he said in one of his speeches, how a society treats its prisoners is how you should judge that society. 2 days after that speech, we were no longer sleeping on thin mattresses. We got beds, mattresses, extra blankets because of that speech. And I didn't really forgive him totally, but I was on my way to forgiveness. I mean, you can't compare a house to a blanket, but yeah, and a mattress. And I came, when I was in jail, the number one rule about jail is that you don't interfere with a gang, with the work of another gang. And if you told me 2 minutes before I decided to change my life that I would change my life, I would have laughed at you. I would have asked you to check your temperature. A young white boy came into prison and he was given a chocolate by one of the gangs. And as a 12-year-old boy, he ate the chocolate. And that evening, they started to rape him. They raped that child for many hours. He cried, he screamed, he begged. No one helped him. I was there. I didn't help him. The next day, he was laying in a corridor naked in his own blood, shivering. And everybody jumped over him because he's a white boy. And just as I was about to jump over him, I looked at him. And something got hold of me. And I said to him, I think you should go to the cops. And he said, I can't go, sir. The criminals killed me. In that moment, at great risk to my own life, I picked him up and I took him to the wardens. And I said, this child has been violated. And they said, there's no proof. I said, look at the blood on my T-shirt. And they said, there's no proof. And I said, I'm going to give you all the proof in the world. And they laughed at me. And I remember when I was sentenced, Judge C.B. Salier said, he asked me, before he sentenced me to 17 years, he asked me, tell me why I should not sentence you to a long prison sentence. Tell me why I should tell me mitigation of your sentence. I stood up and I said to him, I don't want you to give me a lesser sentence. I said, I'm a colored male. You don't know how we grew up as colored boys. You don't know our story. It's too late for you to want to feel sorry for me. You should have felt sorry for all the other colored boys that died. I don't want your mitigation. Do what you want to do. I need to go. And he said he's never met somebody, he's never sentenced somebody that has a potential to become somebody in life. And Judge C.B. Salier said, you are one of the most intelligent people I've had in my court. I'm sentencing you because I know you can make a change in your life. Went to jail, and I decided I'm going to help this boy, and he was white. And I called my mother. Now, one thing about women, that you get to learn that now. They know when they're being lied to. They just sometimes act like they don't know. So when we men lie, they know you lie, but they act like they don't know. So I called my mother. I said to my mom, Mom, I'm changing my life. My mother said, Amen, my child. What? I said, Mom, I need you to do something for me. She said, anything you want, my boy. I said, Mom, I need you to buy me a book on how to operate a secret video camera. My mom was so excited for my change. I asked for one book. She sent me 14 books to jail. I had to tear off the cover so people couldn't see what I was reading. Long story short, I read those books. I studied those books for 6 months. I read nothing else. And I took the money I made from drug selling in jail, and I told my sister, and I got another friend of mine to call his brother to bring us cameras. And we had to dismantle those cameras. We smuggled those cameras in bit by bit, screw by screw, part by part, wire by wire. And we made a video in jail of how they sell children in the sex trade in jail. We made a video of all the guns that's being smuggled. We made a video of how prisoners are truly being treated. And President Nelson Mandela President Thabo Mbeki then sent a commission called the Jali Commission of Inquiry. I was already 6 months before my release, but I came out of jail, and the 6 months, I was released early for good behavior. When I came out of jail, it is the norm. When you've been a general in jail, you come out, you must get a push, a start, what you would call seed funding to start your criminal empire. And I refused the seed funding, and I asked my mother. I was living by my parents' house, small house. And every day I would see, I was on parole, I would see these white kids in our neighborhood. And I asked my mother, what are they doing here? And she said, they're coming to buy drugs. And I said, which school are they at? She's like, Great College, St. Michael's. Next morning I went to the principal of the school and I said, your kids are buying drugs, I would like to tell them about the dangers of jail. And he allowed me to speak at Great College to his children. After that, I was too embarrassed to ask him for money to go back home. Taxi money. But I can tell you they gave me good food. White schools got good food during break. If you ever want to go and you're hungry, go and give a good talk at a white school, they got even dessert. They don't just say, thank you, Ralebua, utle hape. No. They feed you. And I walked home. When I got home, and this is story number 2. I got home, my mom was crying. I said, Mommy, why are you crying? She said, what did you do again? I said, Mom, I did nothing. She said, you lying. I said, Mom, I did nothing. I swear, I did nothing. She said, you lying. I said, why are you saying I'm lying? She said, because there's a big white man looking for you. When you come from jail, you want to hear no white people are looking for you. I said, where is he? She said, behind you. I turned around, and this man said, I'm looking for Gayton Mckenzie. I said, I'm also looking for that bastard. I said, what did he do to you before I tell you what he did to me? He said, Gayton Mckenzie went to my child's school today. Got 2 boys in that school. And he spoke about the dangers of jail. And my boys came back this afternoon. And the one gave me an unlicensed firearm and the other one gave me mandrakes. And they said they want to change their lives because they're scared of going to jail. And I want today to give Gayton Mckenzie something. And he took out his checkbook. And I took out my ID book. And I gave it to him.
Really touching story, guys. I usually explain to a lot of my friends anyway that, this is the character of evil. And that, as human beings, we really have to be careful who we hate or who we just decide to, see as the enemy, because evil has 2 faces, right? There's never a good face anyway, but it has a way of making a group of people hate another group of people, but at the same time, it also has the capacity to make a certain group of people become the very thing they resent, okay? And that's, I think, what I really perceive from Gayton Mckenzie's story here. And in many ways, I know a lot of people have actually called, especially from the Progressive Caucus, have actually called Nelson Mandela a sellout. Gayton Mckenzie here, in his own perspective anyway, really doesn't agree with that argument, because he argues that, Nelson Mandela taught South Africans how to forgive. Although it's really tricky, I know there's a theory in academia that actually, I think it's called the Mandela effect, right? Where many argue that the Mandela that went into prison was actually different from the Mandela that came out of prison. But whatever the case is, whoever it is that came out of Robben Island, I think sprinkled a really powerful fragrance in the world for the peoples of the world to really understand. And that's the concept of forgiveness, right? A lot of people really couldn't imagine, like Gayton Mckenzie shares in this story, he really couldn't understand how he felt betrayed by Nelson Mandela, because upon coming out of Robben Island, a lot of the blacks and colored people in South Africa, who were the majority oppressed by the apartheid system, expected to begin a regime of looting and, revenge, so to speak, on the white people in South Africa. Nelson Mandela became that game changer. And, like Gayton Mckenzie speaks about, he took the road less traveled. And that's why many times, I know it's really easy to really pick a fight. It's really easy to want to argue, to fight back, and or many times, even for me as a black person, I'm not South African, but when I study South African history, which I've studied a lot in detail, I can't help but really pause to really think what was really going on in the minds of the architects of the apartheid system. It really defies imagination, right? Like, it boggles a lot of me personally, it boggles my mind to really ask the question, what were these guys really thinking? But then I see that, most worldviews people adopt actually comes from a certain ideology, which, are generally perceived to be true and real. If you remember, in Germany, the concept of the Übermensch, the Superman, and that was a really ingrained ideology among, many of the Germans at the time, who believed they were of the Aryan superior race. And we saw trickling down of some of those, I don't know if it's the officers per se, but a lot of the people who were, who kind of like favored the nationalist movement in Germany. That a little bit of that trickling down entered into the National Party at the time. And, this is the role ideology actually plays in trying to shape how to define another person. And so the apartheid system sort of borrowed a little from that before it started really, decomposing within, and started forcing the people to really start rethinking, and really rethinking what it is that they were doing. But it's if you look beyond that, you see that's just the character of this thing called evil, right? We see it in the same era of slavery when I was actually conducting a research recently on how Eurocentrism actually dominated the writing of history. So it started from Thucydides' insistence of writing history along the lines of the Peloponnesian Wars, and then we see the second strand of the growing Eurocentrism during the periods of the discovery. This is after the fall of Islam in Europe, right? So in 1453, when Constantinople was captured by Arab power and Islam, and then also the menace of Venice in 1653, we see Islam, rising to power in Europe at the time. But then along the 16th century thereabout, we saw more explorations of Europeans to the Americas and Chinas and all that. This period of discovery, even to South Africa, because I know Vasco da Gama, who actually sailed to South Africa. And so this period of discovery, anyway, along with the French Revolution of 1789, I think that's and also the Napoleonic Wars, we saw Europe now having a lot of military prowess, technological prowess, and this hunger and desire to break free from the aristocratic hold that actually held a lot of its people at the time. So the settlers in the Americas decided to take laws in their own hands to really plunder their resources and that their heritage which they had built. And so we see the emergence of greed and the emergence of evil now slowly seep down into slavery, seep down into what many would have called genocide in the Americas at the time. And then slowly now into the the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism. Then we see the apartheid struggle. So it's all the character of evil. But Gayton Mckenzie here now is pulling the curtain to really help us really reconsider the other aspect, where evil then, if possible and if not really controlled, has the potential to convert a person to become the very thing they resent. And so we see that here, that although, a lot of blacks and coloreds at the time really had a lot of hate for white people, this adoption of the form of evil, rape, it's, what's the word that's being used now for this kind of rape anyway. But it's sad for me anyway. I really see what Gayton Mckenzie must have felt at the time, and it only takes a different kind of conversion anyway. It has to be something outside of the world. It has to be something divine, especially when you listen to Gayton Mckenzie's podcast with Mark G. You see how he describes how he was a really angry youth growing up in South Africa, and the only thing they understood at that region where he grew up was crime. And so this was what dominated the minds of many of the blacks and coloreds growing up in South Africa, was bred by hate, a fervent hate for the apartheid regime that was now really encapsulated within the confines of whiteness. So the white people in South Africa then became the object of this hate, you see. But they had to take divine providence to really get Gayton Mckenzie to really adopt his stance where he is. He was actually, if you listen to the video, he was a gang member. He was among the top of the top, and all that. But then coming to really, in another video, I remember he spoke about how the vice president of the Patriotic Alliance, Kenny Kunene, introduced him to Christ. And then he began a journey of conversion solidly. And then that's how we see his push that God must be returned back to schools and all that. So it's for me, it's a really disturbing story, but at the same time, it's something that we should really learn and be careful in how we decide to fight and who we choose to fight. And rather, I think justice is, for me, a goal and an objective to be attained, you see. Not necessarily revenge per se, but the pursuit of justice should be the key, okay? There's a really popular documentary I completed yesterday on Namibia. It's on YouTube. If you guys want, I could share the link. It's about how, Namibians as well are actually complaining that a few families actually control the majority of the wealth in Namibia, and that, if some form of justice could be achieved, especially economic justice, I don't really know how much that would go in calming the minds of people who feel disenfranchised. But justice is key, and justice is one of the higher ideals that was preached by most of the philosophers we recognize a lot. Socrates, Aristotle, and even Christ himself. He speaks about how any land where justice resides, where justice is domicile, that land would prosper. And so this is what I really think South Africa and South Africans, especially the white South Africans, might need to slowly start really thinking about, you see, if we really want to be honest. And I see that Gayton Mckenzie is somebody who wants to really reconcile the different groups that make up South Africa, but that reconciliation would actually demand a certain form of humility and honesty to really pursue justice and let go of certain things that are being held and adopt a position of equity and equality in that regard. Although I know it might not be enough, because personally, as a black person, I've lived among white people for a decade, and even a little bit above a decade, and I really can attest to the productivity, of people who call white people. But this doesn't mean necessarily that productivity is in also domicile among the blacks, among Indians, among coloreds. But there has to be a way to really help and encourage each and every one of us to grow, so that we become the best versions of ourselves, amidst the stubbornness that actually fights to keep us down. So these are my reflections on this video. Really powerful story. I really hope that probably we can learn one or two from Gayton Mckenzie's story here. But what do you guys think? What do you guys think about it? Share your thoughts in the comments.